this very important event hosted tonight by the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, along with international and European campaigns, including the Simon Bolivar Institute for Peace and Solidarity Among Peoples European Solidarity Network, and the Campaign Against Sanctions on Venezuela. My name is Christine Blower. I'm a Labour member of the House of Lords and former General Secretary of the National Union of Teachers. And I am, of course, a long-time supporter of Venezuela's Solidarity Campaign and the Labour Progressive Friends of Latin America. What we're going to do this evening is find out about the latest developments in Venezuela itself. And as the elections are coming up fast, it's important for us to hear how those deadly illegal US sanctions have been damaging Venezuela and its economy. And crucially, at a time like this, it has prevented Venezuela from being able to get medicines and equipment that it obviously needs to confront the global pandemic that we're all facing. So as we all know, the US has elected Joe Biden. Well, we all know, Donald Trump apparently doesn't know, but we all know that he's been elected, that Biden has been elected in the US. And so there is a question about what the relationship between Venezuela and the US will be, and what role international campaigning and solidarity can play in shaping this. And this affects us here too, because in terms of the actions of the UK government, there were revelations earlier this year of a Venezuela reconstruction unit in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And this is just the latest in a long line of signals that the British government is actually working to what clearly was the Trump agenda for regime change. And this goes from hosting the coup plot of Guaido to the bank and the bank, and of course, it includes the Bank of England's refusal to return the gold held by the Venezuelan government. Britain is again playing a role as the US's chief ally in pushing interventions against the sovereign country in breach of international law. So that campaign on getting the gold returned is a really significant issue that we should bring some pressure to bear on over here. I'm now going to hand over to our two brilliant speakers from whom we're going to hear this evening. Our first speaker will be Doug Nichols. He's the Vice Chair of the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign and General Secretary of the GFTU, the General Federation of Trade Unions. Doug, the floor is yours, and then we will go to Carlos.
Thanks very much indeed, Christine, and thanks for so many comrades and friends joining us this evening, and a massive welcome to Carlos from the Foreign Ministry in Venezuela. Obviously, he's got the up-to-date information from the ground, so I'll just be brief in my remarks. It was great to go to Venezuela on a couple of occasions to see the new formation of a united trade union movement and to go to their founding conferences, and I still have great memories of that. And the VSC, established in 2005, has been an exemplary campaigning organisation, consistently since that time, telling the truth to tens of thousands of people in Britain and Europe about exactly what's happening in Venezuela. So if by any chance your union branch or your constituency party or your community organisation are not yet linked up with the VSC, please have a look and get affiliated. The last time VSC met face to face was in that big rally we had in London to point out the complete ridiculousness of the episode of Juan Guaido being put up by the states, an unknown character, to claim to be president, and alleging that all the problems of Venezuela stemmed from its own government and not from the imperialism of the United States and their blockade. And his attempt at violent overthrow, it looks as though that's been defeated and is part of the past. But there's a new violence taking place. And I was thinking today of that book, I guess many remember it, by Naomi Klein, The Shock Doctrine, how neoliberalism takes natural disasters and natural difficulties and makes them into crises and then privatizes even more and does more harm to the people. So in Cuba, there are in Venezuela, there are two issues which we're particularly concerned with: ending the sanctions and getting their gold back from the vaults in the Bank of England to where they belong, with the people of Venezuela. Now, in 2015, Obama's executive order designated Venezuela as, quote, an unusual and extraordinary threat to the United States national security. So the noose started to be tightened in terms of sanctions then. And then Trump in 2017 tightened them even more. And he was particularly concerned not to see trade with the public sector in Venezuela, and particularly concerned that the banks started to freeze the assets. And this had a direct effect on human life. Citibank refused to handle Venezuelan funds for the purchase of 300,000 insulin doses for diabetics. And then the secondary stage sanctions forced Rosneft, a big Russian company, to withdraw business with Venezuela and to withhold payment of $9 million worth of dialysis supplies. And that blocked the treatment of 15,000 patients. And coupled with the huge blockades of food, that of course has had its impact on human life. And the refusal to trade with the public sector, the health sector being big and public in Venezuela, has just added to that. And so medicines and so on have allegedly been exempt, but actually it's impacted on those. And economists have said that pre-pandemic, in 2017-18 alone, sanctions had killed 40,000 people in Venezuela. And sometimes I think the word sanctions is too soft. Under the 1949 Geneva Conventions, any policy that inflicts damage on an entire population is a war crime. And that's really what it's like now. Even Antonio Guterres from the UN, the Secretary General, has called for the waiving of sanctions and said this is the time for solidarity, not exclusion. And then, of course, just to add to the situation, the states and their embargo and so on forced the banks throughout the world to basically freeze and steal the money that is the Venezuelan people's. So foreign banks seized Venezuelan funds up to about 15 billion euros by the Novo Banco, and Clearstream pinched about 453 million. And in our country, as we know, the Bank of England has got in its vaults 1.3 billion pounds worth of gold, which is subject to the courts, but also subject to the campaigning of Venezuela Solidarity Campaign. We're trying to get 20,000 signatures on our petition about that. So please join in with that if you can. It's particularly important because there's this so-called special relationship between Britain and the US, and we've got a particular responsibility, given that lapdog nature of that relationship to American imperialism, to up the ante on giving back their gold. The US, I read today, is a place where liberty is a statue, and a statue only. So we need to make sure that in campaigning in our country to force our government to break that blockade and to give the money back, we play a significant role and continue to do so. That's enough from me.
Doug, thank you. Thank you very much. And comrades on the call will be able to see the links to the petitions in the chat. So make sure that you do, after this meeting, take those actions that are being suggested to you. So, but we now move to our second speaker, who is Carlos Ron, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs, with responsibility for North America. And he is also the president of the Simon Bolivar Institute for Peace and Solidarity. We are delighted to be joined by Carlos. He will speak to us and then we'll take a couple of questions. Carlos, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to join you in this conversation. It's definitely rare opportunities like this where we get to meet that are very much valued by everyone in Venezuela and by everyone in the Bolivarian Revolution. So I appreciate the opportunity of joining this conversation. So there are a couple of things that I want to mention to give you a context, because I think we are about to go into elections in the coming days. These are National Assembly elections. So one of the most important things that we think we wanted to share with you today was the reason why these elections are so important, and why we are facing a very key moment at the struggle between the Bolivarian Revolution and its enemies from outside. You know, for years now, the Bolivarian Revolution has been some sort of a headache for the United States government and different administrations, as well as for transnational corporate interests that have interests in Venezuela's large oil reserves. As you know, we are the largest reserve of oil in the world. We also have very important reserves of gold and very important reserves of other minerals like coltan and other things that are valuable in the international market. So that has been a key issue of why there's so much interest into what happens in Venezuela. But we've also taken a very independent foreign policy that took a turn away from the unipolar order that was sort of imposed by the United States, and it's moving more towards the multipolar world that we believe is where we should be heading. And that has led to important cooperation outside of our region, outside of our continent, with actors of the importance of Russia, China, as well as many others. But I mentioned these two in particular because, you know, there's a particular interest or even obsession of the United States with some of these countries, and with limiting the possibilities that these countries have into having a presence or connections within Latin America. Very much in particular during the last administration with Donald Trump, you've seen that the US is sort of moving towards a new Cold War type of context, where now China would be the enemy that once you know, the Soviet Union was key to overcome, and now they want to do the same thing with China. Now, that being said, we've also promoted this policy of independent regional integration between all the countries of Latin America, and promoted regional alliances and blocs, and the construction of an infrastructure that does not depend on the United States, and that has also created tension with this country. So the election of President Maduro was met from the onset with aggressions, given the false belief that the US administrations had that the passing of President Chavez basically meant that the revolution process was over, that had, you know, no future. The right wing in Venezuela, from everything from ultra-right extremists to even more moderate centrist type of groups, you know, they weren't able to get any popular support for their neoliberal policies in Venezuela. So they resorted to unconstitutional means of overthrowing the government, whether it be by street violence or even later with the election of the 2015 National Assembly, the current assembly, through what we think is, or what we call, you know, a lawfare process. You know, they attempted through the National Assembly to overthrow the government, to basically say that President Maduro was not in charge or was going to be removed, and then, you know, things have escalated. You know, when they weren't able to do the same things that have happened in other countries in the region, such as Paraguay, or even more notably Brazil. When they weren't able to achieve that through the National Assembly, then they decided to even go to a more extreme type of position, which is where we are now, with this idea, this notion that there is a parallel government in Venezuela, which is recognized by the United States, by some of its international allies in Europe and otherwise, but which of course has no basis in our constitutional order or legal, it has no legal precedent. Now, so the December 6th elections will be very important because these are elections that we must carry out according to our constitution. This is not a choice, and this is very important because you know there's been by the opposition and by the U.S. this idea that we should postpone the elections or having another time, but you know constitutionally we're bound by the constitutional text to carry out these elections this year, so that on January 5th of next year, the new National Assembly takes office. And it will be the 25th election that we've held in 21 years of this democratic and revolutionary process. What I would like you, friends, to think about and to reflect in this discussion here is that I think we have two important battles at stake, or two issues that are really at the core of this elections. We're not only, well, first of all, obviously we need to win, and by we I mean the popular forces, the revolutionary forces in Venezuela. We need to win because we need to regain control of this branch of government that has ineffectively been acting during the last 5 years. Again, their purpose was subversive from the onstart of this of their once they were elected. They were in constant contradiction with all the other branches of government. We have 5 branches of government in Venezuela. All other branches of government were in agreement and in cooperation, but this legislative branch came into conflict. It was in contempt of the Supreme Court. It was in conflict with the presidency, trying to remove the presidency, and it has not been able to, carry out its function. So effectively, has not legislated the way it should have during these 5 years. So there's a necessity from the Venezuelan people to regain control of, the assembly, so that we can have a democratic National Assembly that can play the role that it does in, like any other National Assembly in other democracies. Venezuela is mostly in style more of a presidentialist type of government. However, we need our National Assembly so that legislation can get passed, and we need an assembly that responds, and it's a reflection of the composition of the country, of the political positions that have been taken throughout, in general sense in the country. This is not the fact now, because the extreme opposition that controls the current assembly has been, has had their backs to the country, especially in 2017, where they promoted violence, and in the last couple of years, where they've promoted, invasions, the so-called sanctions, which are really unilateral coercive measures. We use the word sanctions because sanctions implies that there's some legality to these measures. These measures are not legal. These are illegal because they do not comply with the Security Council, which is, the only instance in the world that can actually sanction countries. But these people in the assembly, the extreme right in Venezuela assembly, has pushed for the United States and other countries to take actions against Venezuela, to blockade our money and our resources outside of the country, and to create this situation of internal pressure, or I should say external pressure on Venezuela, so that changes can take place. This does not reflect the feeling of the people in the streets, because the people in the streets have not rallied behind these violent actions, these actions unconstitutionally attempting to overthrow the government, but rather they have shown, every time that they prefer that Venezuelans solve their political differences in the polls, in the assembly, in these spaces for politics, not in any other constitutional mean. So we have the need to regain control over and effectively put into place, this branch of government. But also there's another additional issue, which is that we need to counteract this U.S. imposed narrative where in Venezuela there exists two governments, which is not true. But they have promoted this idea that the current member of the National Assembly, Juan Guaido, is somehow a parallel president who is has some authority and because of they no longer see that the president is fit to be president. They've decided that the elections were not valid and that they somehow have some sort of authority to claim the presidency. But there's nothing in the Venezuelan constitution that allows for this claim, and however it's only being pushed and sustained because there's the support of the Trump administration. So what we're really fighting in these elections is not only the seats of the parliament, which obviously the revolutionary forces need to have a majority again to move on with the project, but also just the right of the Venezuelan people to carry out these elections. Because what the United States is saying, and what this group that is controlled by the United States is saying, is that Venezuela has no right to carry out these elections, that we should wait or we should postpone. I mean, they're pushing, and this is remarkable because these are the people that hold this discourse that they're defenders of democracy throughout the world, but exactly what they're doing is the opposite. They're trying to prevent Venezuelans from exerting the democratic right to hold elections, which is set in the Constitution, and which would actually lead to a better understanding among political forces in the country, because it would be a peaceful solution to differences. Rather, the United States is pushing for all these subversive, unconstitutional types of arrangements. And that's where we have to, make sure these elections there's attention paid to these elections, because even just the issue of having these elections is important for the Venezuelan people, because there's an attempt at blocking Venezuelan democracy. If you look at the Article 13 of their own transition in a statute, that which Guaido and his people use to justify his claiming of the presidency. Well, even there it says that his presidency ends on January 5th, 2021. So what they're trying to do now is to extend this mandates, or what they call mandate, outside of the constitutional period. And this is what we need to recognize and know, and so that people understand that this is what's really at stake. What is this election about for the Venezuelan people? What are people going to vote for? Well, again, this is a vote to redirect the opposition towards channeling the differences democratically and peacefully, as opposed to these unconstitutional means. I can't stress that enough, because I think it's important that what we're seeing now is that there's a large part of the opposition that is participating in the elections. And that is, they've come from the traditional political parties that have opposed the government, but that they don't comply, or they don't accept this idea that the country should be blocked, and that the country should have this, mysterious parallel government, or that the country shouldn't be invaded. And you have to remember, back in May of even this year, we had an attempt of mercenaries invading Venezuela. We had, in 2018, an attempt of a drone with explosives trying to kill the president. I mean, there's been all these attempts of really altering unconstitutionally, the government in Venezuela. So there's a great importance in the fact that a lot of the opposition is participating, wants to, have a say and have a seat in the National Assembly, and this is the way we should channel this. So this is important, that this is what Venezuelans will be voting for: a political solution to these differences, and not this attempt at not recognizing Venezuelan law. Other things that I think are important, and this is more from a revolutionary perspective, it's important that we reject through the vote this extreme group of opposition that so far has done everything within their range, within the National Assembly, to dismantle, the social advances of the Bolivarian Revolution. One of the first things the current group did when they arrived at the National Assembly was to propose a housing law that would actually privatize these homes. I mean, they would actually sell they would actually place in the mortgage market all these homes. So far right now, we built 3 million homes under a public housing project. This has covered the deficit that we had back in 2010. Now we have actually reached that goal that we had initially, but they don't want to keep these homes within the people that need it the most. They actually wanted to find ways to privatize these homes, to have people, place them in the real estate market, and then do a big business with this and take big profit out of this social solution. It's important that the revolutionary forces vote in this election to vote out these people that have held, this type of policy, that have wanted to promote the blocking of Venezuelan accounts, that have actually used the National Assembly as a platform to gain control of Venezuelan assets outside. For example, with Citgo, which is an oil company in the United States, that basically was stolen from the state of Venezuela, from PDVSA, which is its parent company, and was handed over to the Guaido, and there's no accountability to with the money that is coming in from that company. Well, before it used to be a source of income for Venezuela that allow for the purchase of goods, that allow for a medical treatment for patients and so forth. This is also an important election, because I think there's going to be a renewal of the revolutionary forces in Venezuela. There are many new candidacies, especially coming in from the youth, from youth movements, from social movements. And I think this is an opportunity for us to go into that next generation of activists and politicians that would take Venezuela to another important point in its democratic stage. Just so you get an idea, from our side, from the revolutionary forces, there have been a series of proposals, laws that are even being promoted as part of the campaign, already envisioning what could be approved and what should be defended during this new term of the National Assembly. We're talking about a family protection law that would rule against, try to avoid, violence in the household against children, also violence against women. We have also a right to recreation law in order to generate policies for arts, culture, and sports. We're promoting a law for sustainable development and environmental care, which is important, so that we need to move a step forward in our environmental policies here in Venezuela. We have laws that are going to try to find ways to overcome this blockade that we have. An entrepreneurship law, which is going to support new initiative. Also a digital economy law which would somehow help us with digital currencies and all these things that would somehow diminish our dependence on the U.S. international financial system. Other important laws that I think that we want to promote: the water and gas laws, just because of the social services that have been so damaged during the blockade, and so we try to find ways to move forward. A law that will simplify public administration and grant more transparency. A law against violence and cruel treatment towards animals, and two very important laws with regards to the building of the communes, with the communal city laws, which give us the groundwork to create projects within a city-wide territory that would be communal, and that would allow popular participation, direct popular participation and protagonism, so that these actions can take place, as well as a communal parliament law that would allow the parliaments to act. And I'm running out of time, but let me just run really quickly just to give you some facts that I think are very critical for you to understand. There's claims that these elections here are not, these elections were not going to have the participation of the opposition. But like I said before, there's an important part of the opposition. There are 107 political parties participating, of which 98 are opposition parties, and there's 14,000 candidates trying to aim for the 277 seats, in the assembly. The system that it's already widely known throughout the world is a very secure and efficient voting system. It goes through 16 audits, and we will be able to do that. We have already been in that process. We have international observers that will come and accompany the elections. Some of them are electoral experts, and some are people from political organizations that will also be here to accompany this process. And it is important because we think that people must understand that these elections will be a defining moment for a new, for new policies to be implemented in Venezuela. It will be a defining moment so that dialogue for peace and political construction can be effective in Venezuela. I think my time has run out, but I will be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Fantastic, Carlos. That's an absolutely brilliant platform that you've talked to us about. And just to say that we've got about 150 people on this call across the various platforms. They're literally the length and breadth of the UK, but also from Spain, from Ireland, from Norway, from Switzerland, from Greece. And of course, there are some comrades from the United States who've joined us too. I'm going to put a couple of questions now. I'm going to put them first to Doug, who can kind of respond to the questions and kind of sum up a little bit. And then I'm going to come back to Carlos. So I should tell you, comrades, Carlos is going to jump off this call very, promptly at about 7:25. So I'm going to do all my things about the petitions and so on after Carlos has finished speaking. But first of all, we'll come to Doug, and we've got a couple of questions. One is specifically, they're the same questions to Doug and Carlos. What is hoped for by way of a relationship with the Biden administration, but in particular because it's been reported that the both the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of State are likely to be people who were members of both the Obama and Clinton foreign policy administration. So that may be a hint. And a second question about one of the comrades on the call says that he's read about very many attacks on infrastructure in Venezuela, in particular oil refineries and so on. So a concern about how Venezuela can protect itself against this. And then he says these are probably US-backed attempts to make the Venezuelan economy scream. So Doug, if you'd like to address those questions and make any kind of final remarks you want to, and then we'll come to a response from Carlos. Thank you.
I think it would be very presumptuous of me to try and answer those questions. I feel really that they should be answered by Carlos, who will have much better insight than me. I'm not going to pretend to have an answer to those questions. But just to say to all colleagues, in my sort of sum up remarks, we've had many periods of intense attack on Venezuela and crisis. And the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign has always been there, always providing the facts, always organising the rallies and bringing people together. And we're going to continue to do so with even more resolve. So if anyone's online that's not part of the organisation, join up, please. But I think Carlos should really tackle those questions. They're very much in his domain.
Thanks very much, Doug. Okay, so back to you, Carlos, for some observations about Biden and also about attacks that have certainly some comrades have been reading about in Venezuela. If you'd like to respond on those things and any other comments you want to come back with.
Sure. I think, well, definitely, I would first say that I think it's early still to talk about the how the new administration is going to handle Venezuela. I think, we have to remember that the Biden was vice president during the Obama years, and during that administration, there was the first executive order that actually called Venezuela unusual extraordinary threat to U.S. national security. That being said, I think what has been constant throughout, almost 20 years now, has been an intention of undermining or trying to change the government of Venezuela from all types of administrations in the United States. So that being said, the approach that we want and that we're ready for is one of dialogue. I mean, we are open. We've always said this. This is not new. We've always been open to dialogue with the United States, as long as it's a dialogue that takes place within, the respect within recognizing of Venezuelan national sovereignty, and hopefully, this will lead to a change in the U.S. administration policy that would look for diplomatic and political ways to address our differences, and not coercion through sanctions or aggressions of any other type. That is what we wish for. Now, what's going to happen, we don't know. We could obviously expect different forms and style, obviously, because these are two different people. President Trump and President-elect Biden are two different type of approaches. But I think it is important to not to step ahead of time and kind of see where things will lead. We want to have a relationship with the United States that is respectful of Venezuelans' national priorities and national interests. We cannot, we will never give up our defense of our national integrity and of our, national democratic process. With regards to the issues of infrastructure, well, yes, I mean, this is not new. This is something that has happened throughout the revolutionary period. We have different attacks, even, regarding the elections, actually, one of the attacks of the violence that we suffered about a year or so ago was even an attack on voting machines. And I think this was, there was an intent of obstructing the electoral process. Fortunately for us, we were already looking for updates of software and machinery so that we could have a better system, and that had already advanced some, so that now we're still able to to meet the requirements of that the elections poses. But these are the type of attacks that we see all the time. We see attacks, attempts, people. There was a U.S. citizen that was caught taking pictures at one of the refineries, and we have seen throughout this year other attempts, attacking not only infrastructure but generating chaos throughout the country. I mean, the invasion that took place in May, where you had the mercenaries coming in from Colombia, and two of them being U.S. citizens and actually U.S. Green Berets. It was important, an important show that the U.S. is still trying to promote these disruptions and these stabilization actions. So this is a constant. This is not something that we're alien to. But I think it's important that our security forces, but also our people, organized. One of the very remarkables, and I don't know if you got to see this image at one point, but when the mercenaries came in May, it was fishermen, local fishermen, organized in the communities that were actually able to stop them. And this is remarkable, because it shows you that there's this narrative where they're trying to sell the idea that Venezuela is a place oppressed by a ruler and everybody is sort of in a sad position. But this is actually a country that has a democratic process, that elected a president, but that has a conscious citizenship that is ready to defend its national sovereignty and its democracy. And that is exactly what was shown at that invasion attempt in May. The fact that the opposition is participating with important numbers, important political parties in this election shows that even those who oppose a socialist policy that that the government carries out, well, you have people from the right wing, but the people that don't agree with an invasion, that don't agree with sanctions, that don't agree with this foreign intervention, and that they have their different views of how the country should run, but they don't want to be part of that group of people that attack the country, and I think that's very important.
That's great, Carlos. That's it's very uplifting to hear that. I wonder if I could just ask you something about how Venezuela and the Venezuelan people are managing in the face of this pandemic, because clearly I mentioned in my opening remarks the problem with sanctions and the difficulty of getting in medicines and medical equipment and so on. But it would seem from the outside, from those of us who are paying attention in a sympathetic and solidaristic way, that notwithstanding those difficulties, Venezuela is managing to deal with the pandemic in a better way than other places. So do you want to make some remarks about that?
Yeah, let me say, we have around so far throughout the pandemic, we have somewhere around 99,000 cases. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but and which is obviously an important number. But out of those, there's about 94,000 that have been already recovered. So we have a small rate of current active cases in comparison. And of deaths, we haven't even reached the 1,000 deaths in this sense. Again, obviously, all these losses of lives are important, but I say this in comparison to or even our neighboring countries where there has been a lot of difficulty to fight off the pandemic. We have been lucky because it's very difficult to find that pandemic when you're blocked and when you can't have you can't get the medical equipment and the things that you need on time. Just to give you a brief idea, but first of all, we have very large difficulty finding people to sell medical supplies to Venezuela, because just the selling of these supplies may imply sanctions or some type of action from the U.S. against these companies. So the companies are afraid to do this, and they'd rather not have business with Venezuela. Once we find some of the companies that are willing to have business with Venezuela, then they hike up the prices 2-3 times, because they know that we don't have that many choices. So it's even more expensive for us to deal with this. And again, imagine that we were talking about a country that has at least $6 billion blocked throughout the world in bank accounts. So it's very difficult for us to now meet these requirements, and we can import or export oil because of the sanctions themselves, which was our primary source of income. So this is a very strong hardship on the Venezuelan people. But even if you find people that were willing to sell you at a hiked up price, then the other problem becomes how to pay them, because the financial system is completely blocked. I mean, we can't, if we make a payment, it's either delayed or examined, or or all these hurdles that come, and even just blocking the transaction itself. And Doug was making a reference to this at the beginning of how important medicines before the pandemic had been blocked. Imagine now in this context. The one way that we were able to meet or to fight this blockade was through solidarity, and it has been very important. And we must always say this. The support we have gotten from China, Russia, Cuba, Iran, Turkey, in allowing us, in helping us to address this pandemic in many different ways. With the Cubans have brigades of doctors here, working in the communities with Venezuelan doctors, trying to find just to pinpoint where the possible contagion areas are, so that we take the proper care and the proper precautions. We had Chinese help in setting up our infrastructure and how to work a plan to how to execute our plan of mitigating the spread of the disease. And then we have had all these other countries also helping us to giving us allowing for the sale of medicine and the treatment and everything that we need for protection. If it weren't for the solidarity of these countries, we would be in a really, really difficult position. We will probably be far worse off than our neighbors that haven't, that their problem is different. Their problem is that they have a government that has probably taken more interest in protecting the economy or in trying not to or trying to hide the numbers rather than actually dealing with the population. This pandemic has shown that the current capitalist system does not have the tools, does really not have the tools to address this issue. The countries that have done better are those that have always believed in state-run, healthcare, and that have always believed that there's a role for the state in providing the right amount of the right infrastructure for health to be addressed, and also because we have community organizing. That is very important. None of this could be done if it wasn't for community organizations that are able to tell you where the needs are in a specific community, that have been able to help people get food when they're in the age that are at most risk, that have been able to even masks, face masks were elaborated by some of the communes that do this type of work, because there's a sense that we're all in this together, and the only way to get out of this is working together. And that's something that runs not only from the government, but particularly from our political and our community organizations here.
Thank you, Carlos. These are inspiring words, I must say. I mean, I'm sure there are lots of people on this call who would have been delighted to have been able to come to Venezuela to be election observers. So we'll just have to come and be election celebrators sometime when you've had a successful election and we are able to travel again.
But I'll tell you something though. There is one feature this year that is different from before, and because of the pandemic and because everything sort of it's new. There will be ways for you to follow at the website of the National Electoral Council, and we could definitely send you more information on this, so that people that are interested. But you're going to be able to follow in real time the audits and even the voting process through the Electoral Council, so that people outside can also have that view that normally would have presence with your presence here, but it will be available for people to see and watch. Well,
that's great. We've said on a number of these meetings where we've been online that actually, although almost everything about the pandemic is absolutely awful, one of the things that has been promoted is far more of these international events where we can hear directly the voices from the countries, with whom we're interested in, to whom we want to provide solidarity. Now, so as to make sure that you're not late off for your meeting, Carlos, I just say, if there's any other thing that you want to say, that's fine. And if not, I'm going to go to my closing remarks.
You could go ahead if you want. And then
Thanks.
I'll close in 2 minutes.
Thanks very much. It's been great to have you on this call. So I'm going to just go through quickly some of the things that we definitely want people who've joined this call to do, please. There are 3 petitions that are highlighted in the chat box, and they are all important. There is a petition about making sure that the EU, that Europe respects the outcome of the elections. There's a very important petition about signing up against sanctions against Venezuela. You could hear from what both Doug and what Carlos was saying, that the sanctions against Venezuela have had a direct and lethal impact on the people of Venezuela. So that's important. And the final one, which has been mentioned a couple of times, and our target in the next day or 2 is to get 20,000 signatures on this petition, is the one for the Bank of England to give back the Venezuelan gold, which is currently being held here. And as you could see from Carlos's remarks, the fact that their money is sequestered all over the place has, again, a material impact on the livelihood, but also the life of Venezuelan people. I think, comrades, that you could hear from the platform that was being outlined by Carlos for what it is that they want to do when they are, as we firmly hope and believe that they will be re-elected in the National Assembly to take power again in Venezuela. The focus on housing and social housing, the focus on a law on the right to recreation, I think sounds fantastic, and also a focus on sustainable development, a country that was highly reliant on oil and gas, obviously has to be thinking about how they move forward. So I think there was some that was an absolutely brilliant conversation with Carlos. His platform sounded fantastic. There is a lot for us to do in terms of solidarity. There's always a lot to do. Let me just abuse my position in the chair for a second and say that Carlos mentioned the importance of the Cuban doctors who'd been in Venezuela helping. I'm sure that everyone on this call knows that there is a call from the Cuba Solidarity Campaign to nominate the Henry Reeve Medical Brigades for the Nobel Peace Prize this year. As a member of the House of Lords, I've been able to make a nomination. People can only make nominations from certain categories, but you can support the idea because we can see that they've been doing brilliant work in Venezuela, but we know very well that the Cubans do brilliant work in so many other countries. So I'm sure that Carlos will send us the information so that we can follow with close attention everything that's happening in the Venezuelan elections. You can stay up all night on December the 6th, and then have a celebration on January the 5th. I'm going to leave the last word to you, Carlos, just to say goodbye to comrades and move on to your next meeting.
Well, again, just want to thank you for this opportunity. Look, if there's one thing I want to leave you with is for you to know that this isn't a normal election in Venezuela, in the sense that it is not just about the platform and the things that we need to do to deepen our revolutionary process. That is definitely an important part of it. But I think that we have the additional burden of showing the world that these elections are not only constitutional, but that we have a right to carry them out. Because that is exactly what the U.S. is trying to do, is to block the carrying out of this election, and its European allies will also try to undermine the results of the election. And the importance is that once these elections take place, and once a new assembly is sworn in January, this whole idea of the parallel, interim government disappears. It has no legal basis, and it has to be a moment of reflection for European governments in particular. What are they going to do? How can they justify trying to keep this, this fiction there? Trying to keep, the reason that the gold is blocked in the banks in the UK and elsewhere is because they argue that this man Guaidó is the president of Venezuela and his should be somehow his decision. Well, that runs out after these elections, so that excuse has to run out, and it's important that we defend that. We all defend that, because this is the right of the Venezuelan people to to carry out their elections and to have a say in the future of the country. And the main motive behind this election is really to return to politics in Venezuela, to take this opposition that has been involved in all these destabilization attempts and all these unconstitutional way outs and all this violence, and to channel this again through politics, through the rule of law, through elections. So we need the support of people outside of Venezuela to stand up for that, to realize that that these are the reason. This is the main reason why these elections have gotten so much importance, and that it is of vital essence that people support the Venezuelan people in defending the outcome and the right that we have to carry out these elections. So we really appreciate all of your solidarity, not just today, but always. We know So we can't thank you enough for the solidarity that you have given us, and for standing up for justice, and for making sure that your elected leaders in the UK, for example, know that if they really want to defend democracy, they need to defend and respect the outcome of this election, and respect the changes that come from them, and respect Venezuelan sovereignty. So thank you again for all your solidarity. Thank you for all the efforts. Thank you for the letters. Thank you for the the mobilizations all the time. Thank you for always being constantly there for us. And now that we have the Simón Bolívar Institute, which I have had the great responsibility also of carrying out this task. We hope that we are also in a position to strengthen our relationship between organizations in our two countries, so that we can also show you the solidarity that Venezuela has with the working class of the UK, and with all the people in the world that are trying to fight for a more just society. So thank you again, and hopefully we hope to see those of you that are coming. We'll be happy to see you here. And those of you that can, we hope that we can soon meet again.
Carlos, thank you very much indeed. So you heard it from Carlos. It's really, really important that we get on with these solidarity activities here, that we sign those petitions, that we write to anyone we can, that we really make the case about the gold. But finally, thank you very much for the offers of solidarity, because we know that solidarity is not a one-way street. You offer us solidarity, we offer you solidarity. It's an international obligation on socialists that we should be solidaristic the one with the other. So with that, comrades, thank you very much for your participation and attendance. Thank you for being here, Doug. Thank you for all the people who did all of the technicals behind. Make sure that you sign up to the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, sign the petitions. Watch this again on whatever live or whatever streaming event you can. Make sure that lots of other people see it. And thank you very much for all being here from all of your various countries. Solidarity.